y'all. Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to another episode of the Forward Ever podcast. And today we're going to be discussing the situation in Mali and why we feel it's really important to defend Mali. So before we begin, we're just going to introduce ourselves. My name is Prudence. You may remember me from the Senegal episode. I was born in Cameroon, but I reside in Calgary, which is in Western Canada. I am an organizer of Black People United, which is a mutual collective serving the African communities here in Calgary, and I'm also a work study member within the All African People's Revolutionary Party.
Greetings, I'll introduce myself next. My name is Inem. You may remember me from the Senegal episode. Prudence and I both worked on that episode. Definitely check it out because I think we're going to touch on some similar themes today. I am a daughter of the Nigerian diaspora. I grew up in Northern California, and I currently live in Ouagadougou. That is the correct Moray pronunciation of the city that's better known as Ouagadougou in French and English. It's the capital city of Burkina Faso. Here, I am co-running the Thomas Sankara Center, a Pan-African library and political education center. And I'm also a work study member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I'm so excited to be on the show with y'all today.
I will introduce myself next. I am Eliamani Ismail. I was born in the United States, but my mother is Malian and my father is Tanzanian. I am also a work study member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and I am currently based in Senegal, where I am doing research into different types of justices, particularly as they show up in the cinematic realm and the literary realm, etc. And this is my first podcast, but I'm very excited to start. And start we will. So before we get started, we're just going to do some ancestor call-ins and call into the space some of the fighters of our cause and have them be with us today. First, obviously, is going to be Modibo Keïta, who was the first president of the Malian Republic. He was a socialist and a Pan-Africanist at his core. He entered Mali into the first iteration of the All-African states, which was Mali, Guinea, and Ghana, with our beloved Nkrumah and Touré. And he wanted his country to move away from French neocolonialism. And even though he was exposed eventually by a coup d'etat type thing that was led by France, it is such a beautiful honor to be living in this time period where his beloved country is forcing Africa, particularly Francophone Africa, in the direction of Pan-Africanism and away from the grips of French neocolonialism. So we call him into this space and we thank him for his example and that we can be here witnessing his legacy today.
That's amazing, and I'm so happy to be in the presence of Modibo Keïta. The other ancestor that we want to call in today is Aline Sitoé Diatta. She was she started as a domestic worker, a young domestic worker in the Casamance region of Dakar, Senegal, under French colonial rule during the time. I believe this was like the 1940s. I hope I'm not getting the date wrong. And she was working for a French colonizer, doing housework for this colonizer. And at one point she visited Dakar, and the story goes that in Dakar she heard a divine voice that told her that she needed to go back to Casamance and liberate her people from the French and to resist all forms of French colonialism. And she actually initially ignored this divine voice, and the story goes that she was paralyzed for a period of time after ignoring it, and that convinced her.
Hello and greetings, Akwaba. We hope that you are well. Hope that you are in fine physical, mental, and spiritual shape today. And we're glad that you're joining us for this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And we are especially excited that you're joining us for this week's episode, The Dignity of the Indigenous People's Struggle in the Western Hemisphere. So we honor the Indigenous people today with our program and the dignity of their struggle for justice and forward human progress. And we talk about it in the context of their struggle really being a struggle for land, because land equals power, and the Americas, from Alaska all the way down to Chile, the top of North America all the way down to the bottom of South America, belong to the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. And their struggle is a struggle for land reclamation, the right for their lands to be returned to them as they rightfully belong. So we're going to talk about that and the dignity of that struggle today. And we also give honor and respect to our African ancestors, the folks who are the reason that we were here. We, like the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, are also engaged in a land reclamation struggle that's based on the dignity of our sacrifices that our ancestors have made and the return of our land. And the only just rights that African people anywhere on earth, no matter where we live, have to any land is Africa. That's the land that belongs to us. All these other places that we're in belong to other peoples. So it's a very interesting dichotomy, looking at the indigenous people struggle and the African struggle, and that's what we're going to explore today. So we're glad that you're here to join us for that. And as always, we just get started with just making our brief introductions. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored again by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan-African political party with its base in Africa. And our objective, what we're fighting for, is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one united socialist Africa, one Africa under one continental socialist government. That's what we're fighting for. And we don't care if you don't believe that it'll never happen. You know, whatever you're fighting for, more food and more weed and more alcohol, and that probably will happen for you. But we believe that Pan-Africanism is the solution. And so we're the type of people that we're never deterred by what people think we can't do. We're only motivated by what our ancestors have given us the energy to achieve. And we don't believe that anything can stop us from achieving Pan-Africanism. We are committed to that objective. And we believe Ahmed Sekou Touré when he said that there is nothing human beings cannot do. So we are committed to that. So if you're one of those people that's like, well, that'll never happen, you're wasting your breath with us. Go look in the mirror and say that. We are going to achieve Pan-Africanism. And our work to achieve it is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is displayed on the page here. And that book gives us the strategy of how we're going to bring about Pan-Africanism by uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground, on the African continent, who agree with the objective of Pan-Africanism being one unified socialist Africa. And we have to say that because people say Pan-Africanism and mean all types of things. For some people, it just means people who consider themselves Black being in some sort of nebulous unity all over the world. And for other people, it might mean some sort of economic. I even saw there's on Facebook, there's a page, Pan-Africanist for Trump. So Pan-Africanism, just the word, can mean anything. So that's why we clearly define it. One unified socialist Africa, revolution to create a new world for all African people scattered and suffering all over the world, and to make our contribution to all peace and justice loving people worldwide. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and Shakura, my biological and ideological daughter. And needless to say, both of us are active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So to get us started, I turn it over to Shakura.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Comrade. Appreciate you. So, greetings, everyone. Very excited for us to always give honor and praises to our comrades, our Indigenous comrades. It's definitely a conversation that still continues to be had, and we should all be taking more of a step to bring up this conversation more and more, not just because it's this time of year, but because so many people have no political education to really understand what happened to Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, what's still happening to them, and also what are some tactical procedures that we can apply so that we can start to resist colonization and so that we can start to promote Indigenous people getting their land back, having different conversations, being able to understand exactly what's taking place so that we can be more accurate when we speak and have more evidence-based conversations when we're giving information. And so these intentions behind that really will start to highlight why we're trying to resist colonialism. And, we always try to make a concerted effort as the All African People's Revolutionary Party to make sure that we take a stance where it is very public and very clear that we support any struggle of oppressed peoples that are in organizations working for justice, because we find that we can grow our numbers and improve ourselves better if we're able to connect with other folks that have a struggle that they're working towards. Then we can unify our forces with them and they can unify their forces with us. And then we're able to have more of a directed approach, if you will. Sometimes when you do this work, when you're in organizations that are working for justice, because you deal with capitalism every day, you deal with oppression, you deal with white supremacy, sexism, patriarchy, homophobia every day, it can be kind of daunting. It can be kind of difficult to find motivations to keep going, especially when you see the system continuing to get over. It's for some of us because it's been doing such a good job for 500 plus years. But the other part of that is because we're unifying our forces with other oppressed groups, such as Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, or even Palestinian people, the same piece that kind of makes us feel, oh, this is kind of daunting. There's a little burnout happening here. But the other side of that is you feel mobilized all over again. You feel resuscitated. You feel electrified all over again. You are reminded your intention is reset, if that makes sense. You understand that this struggle is not just happening to you and your people, which allows you to unveil the individualized approach. And then you start to really look at, man, this is happening to the people that I love and my people, and it's happening to y'all too. And then you start to draw connections. Then you find yourself going down different rabbit holes because you're trying to research more about just how long has colonization been taking place. And so if we were to apply that to tonight's lecture, we understand that since 1492, Christophe Colon, better known as Christopher Columbus, stumbled through the Caribbean and discovered the Arawak people. Now, we are familiar with this area of that part of the Caribbean known as the Dominican Republic today, but at that time we understood it had a different name. And so this was in fact an invasion, and it's important to like clearly use that language so that we can be super resistive of propaganda, especially false narratives, false propaganda that exists, so that people again have an opportunity to increase their political education in a truth justice loving way. So if we're going to resist and if we want to tell the story of what's happened to the Indigenous people, we need to make sure that we're using evidence-based truths to do that. We can't just continue to use the same lies that the system is telling us, because their intention is to wipe out the Indigenous people and to continue to steal their land, to continue to make sure that they are unheard of and unknown and not thought about and ignored. We need to make sure that we're resisting that by any means necessary. So that means that we understand that calling out this invasion is very necessary because it further illustrates how vicious this system is. It further illustrates how inhumane this system is. And it also further illustrates for some people who have no idea what has happened to the indigenous people, it allows them to really start to think about just how messed up this is. And, you get to a point where if you've lived in the diaspora long enough, you get to a point where you hear stories about things happening and the inhumanity, and you think to yourself, that's disgusting. Like, there's no way that a person could behave that way. But under capitalism, anything is possible, right? Because it's all about profiting and making sure that, private corporations have control over resources, even if it means thousands of people dying, even if it means thousands of people getting sick, even if it means thousands of people being harmed, being traumatized in any way, shape, or form. Those things are irrelevant. They're not as significant. They hold no weight in terms of stopping capitalism from continuing on to promote what it's supposed to promote. And it's always interesting to me because I'm still approaching it from a very humanistic standpoint. So somebody told me today about how there have been policies that have been released by the former president to reduce the amount of meat inspections for lunch meats and packaging companies that package products that can be sold as frozen meats, chicken nuggets, chicken strips, things of that nature, from different companies all across the board. And so the policy was set where you wouldn't need to have your meat inspected as frequently, um, which I just immediately said, what about all those people who are going to get sick? Because that's the whole purpose of inspecting meat, is to make sure that it meets a certain safety level caliber of what can be consumed by a person. And my friend said to me, well, how are they going to pay for their expensive cars and their houses if they're worried about taking care of people? And I laughed, because it's facetious, but I'm thankful. I'm so thankful that the ancestors have continued to remind me that this work is bigger than me. I'm so thankful that they've continued to center that, and they've continued to motivate me that I have a responsibility to all poor, oppressed people, especially Africans, right? And so I'm thankful that my first thought was, you can't treat people like that. I'm thankful for that because not everyone would think that as their first thought. And I think that's where we have to start to shift the behavior, whereas we shouldn't just be having empathy and, thinking critically about meat inspection. We should be thinking critically about indigenous people and what exactly has happened in terms of the status of where they are now, the status of what's going on in terms of how we think about what their land reclamation looks like. Is it enough to just have a land reclamation notice and statement, or are there other things that folks can do? How do we resist colonization by using terms that are decentering colonization? I have taken a very radical approach where since my birth, my parents have been using unthanksgiving or, another form of that noun to describe that day. I have never, and I rarely use absolutes, but I have never said the word that you all call the holiday, because to me, it's a bad word. It's like saying the N word or the B word. To me, it implies that this is a beautiful day. And I don't believe that. I think that it's a day filled with unconsented sexual assault, theft of land, murder, genocide, deception, trickery, inhumanity. I could go on. So it's not a beautiful day to me. It's not a day that I look forward to. It's not a day that I enjoy. And I think it's a reminder of all of the trauma that has been brought on indigenous people. Meanwhile, people don't need to recognize that we're using their resources every single day. They are a people that still exist and they matter. We're using their resources every single day. And so these are the kind of things that we have to think more about, because them being able to take over the indigenous lands, doing all the things that they did in terms of wiping out indigenous peoples, making so that these folks would stay sick and remain sick. And to this day, because of the trauma that they went through with having their land stolen, they have continued to show some of the worst health outcomes known to humanity, sometimes even worse than African people. And I've been studying it very closely because I'm definitely connecting that the traumas that oppressed peoples go through has everything to do with their health outcomes. So we have to think more about like exactly what that looks like, because really what we're speaking to is European colonization really gave birth to the connection of how slavery would start to allow for the build up of wealth at our expense, even if it meant continuing to exploit not only indigenous people, but African people as well. And so, again, we encourage you all to set an intention for how you plan to learn something from this seminar today. Is there one thing that you can do as the seminar ends tonight for the entire month of November as a way of honoring Indigenous people? Maybe you want to start by not saying the word that that perpetuates the holiday where so many of our comrades were murdered and taken advantage of. So maybe you want to start saying, excuse me, on Thanksgiving, or maybe you want to start saying Thanksgiving. There's so many different ways you could say that. Maybe you just want to do the research where you can really start to connect those things. Maybe you are learning that you should be incorporating the word indigenous into your vocabulary. Maybe you should be incorporating exactly how much indigenous land has been exploited and stolen so that you can start to have more ethical conversations about what that looks like. There's so many different approaches that we could take. And I think the biggest one is understanding that African folks and indigenous folks have always been hand in hand with our struggles because they are very much parallelly aligned, very much so aligned. And so I'm very humbled to note that the very first relationships that I noticed as a little girl was having the American Indian movement speak at African Liberation Day. And even as a little girl, I may not have truly understood why they were there, because I think as I started to get older, I expected African people to be there because I knew it was an African event. So I had to learn, this there are European people here because they're representing the Irish Socialist Republic Party in Ireland. There are indigenous people here because they're representing the American Indian movement, Palestinian people because the Palestinian liberation. And so, it's taken me some time, especially as an adult, to put all of this together. But my point is, we can join forces in terms of understanding that when we have events, they are humbly coming. And when they have events, they invite us to speak. And being able to be in their space, going to the Sunrise event, if you are in the Bay Area and you can travel to Alcatraz. Not just that, but just finding a way to pay homage to them. There are indigenous Indian mounds here in Memphis to this day. And I told you I don't celebrate the holiday, but I do try my best to take some of the cleanest natural water that I have, and I try to go and do a libation where I can call not only on indigenous ancestors and even names that I don't know, but also African ancestors, because this particular ground was not only exploitive and harmful to indigenous people, but also to Africans who became enslaved here on these grounds. And so just thinking about all that we come from and understanding that this is where this all comes from, even looking at the image, seeing the words that are listed there, and just kind of understanding where this accurate description really comes to describe Christopher Columbus. Not buying into the propaganda when they tell you that he discovered something, not buying into the propaganda when you are perpetuating the system of him discovering something. And when you see and hear people speaking rhetoric that is not true, how comfortable are you with speaking up to that? Next slide, please. How comfortable are you with calling it out and making a statement that the worst thing we could do is to continue to spew and share lies? That's not helping any of this. It's helping the oppressor stay in power, but it's not helping the rest of us with actually seeking the truth. And if you're okay with just using lies and not having any basis on truth or equity or humanity, okay, so be it. But I doubt that very seriously you'd be listening to this seminar, watching this seminar, however you are tuning in, if you weren't interested in either achieving what is the truth or being able to ascertain it so that you can then try to share it with others who are lacking that information. Either way, you have a responsibility to share what the ethics is, right? And so that means that we have to do some more research on that. And we also have to understand, we're talking about Richard Oakes, right? The leader of the reclaiming of Alcatraz by indigenous people from 1969 to 1971. And that was stated in Reclaiming the Land as a liberatory act to combat 500 years of subjugation against Indigenous people by the US government. There is so much more than what we have available to us. This is why it's our responsibility to increase our political education. Usually we play music at the beginning of our seminars, but I asked Comrade Ajamu if we could play a piece from the Forward Ever podcast, which is another media outlet that the All African People's Revolutionary Party offers, because we are trying to show you all that there are so many different ways for you to increase your political education. Now, we're not saying that it's enough for you to just listen to a podcast. We do encourage you to join an organization that is working for justice, but we're also asking you to make some type of dedication for the entire month of November to some Indigenous organization, whether you're volunteering your time, you're volunteering money, maybe you have items that you can donate, some type of action that you can do, changing your language, considering how you're going to use Indigenous in your vocabulary, whatever that looks like. But it's really going to take all of us to take the next step in terms of increasing our political education. Some of us might be ready to join an organization that's working for justice, and we would love that. We would love if you could join an organization that's working for justice or start one. But for those that are not ready to take that step, the next step is a little bit less steep, but still very important. And so just continuing to set that intention, thinking more and more about that, and thinking about comrades like Richard Oakes, thinking about what it means to reclaim Alcatraz for Indigenous people for that time period, especially what was going on in the world at that time. And just thinking more about how you have a responsibility. Even if you're not Indigenous, you have a responsibility to Indigenous people. We have tried our best to make that perfectly clear to every single one of us, because the bottom line is it's a threat to injustice as long as Indigenous people stay exploited and inhumane because they are treated inhumanely. It's a threat to us. It's a threat to us. And so we want to make sure that we support them as much as we can, because their victory turns out to be our victory. Our victory turns out to be their victory. Next thing you know, Palestinians will have a victory, which will impact both of us. And then our comrades in Ireland will have a victory, which will impact all four of us. And next thing you know, all these oppressed people, all these colonized people will be able to have the regimes that they are interested in that benefit those group of people from a mass Pan-Africanist, or if they are of another background, whatever their ideology phrases that they would fit in there to substitute how they define socialism, what that may look like. But we have every intention of supporting that because our values align with theirs and we understand what that looks like. The last thing I'll say before I pass it back to Comrade Ajamu is we don't just see the unification of African people and Indigenous people through all African People's Revolutionary Party events like the African Liberation Day, but we also see it through the work that we're doing on the continent as well as throughout the world, and the fact that we are trying our best to connect with as many organizations that are working for justice, especially those that are not servicing Africans, because we consider them to be our sibling organizations. So for example, I'm so proud of the work that we're doing where we are in cahoots and supporting of the political administration that's taking place in Venezuela. At least within the last year or so, I believe we've been celebrating the new president who was able to come in office, Nicolas. And so just having that kind of article on our website, you all, so that Africans everywhere can read about the work that I believe it's the United Socialist Party of Venezuela is doing. We're putting that on our website because we're still trying to help you see, first and foremost, the connections that we're making. But even more than that, we're starting to highlight some of the beliefs that that organization has and how that organization's beliefs align with ours, which it very much does in terms of their definition of, they call it a pan-Hispanic socialist outcome versus our definition of a pan-African socialist outcome. And so this is the kind of work, you all, and this is what that looks like. And so it's not just enough that we want to make those connections at events, but we want to maintain those connections and continue to build that solidarity, because this work is important and it matters to all of us. And as I said, we all have a responsibility, whether it's as big as joining an organization or maybe something a little smaller, like doing more research about indigenous organizations that believe in socialism. That could be the first step as you start to incorporate using the word indigenous. So whatever your intention is, make sure you set it. And don't forget about it next week when something stressful happens, because capitalism has a way of doing that. Make sure you remind yourself, write it down, put it in your phone, make sure that it's coming off as a calendar invite every day at the same time. So you're forced to look at it. It gets the notification on your watch so you can read it and remind yourself that this is bigger than you. This is bigger than you. These next 2 months are going to be full of propaganda and BS and spending money and BS and BS and BS. And we need to have a way to resist the BS. The best way to do that is to remind ourselves that this is bigger than us. Because if we do that, then we can stay motivated on why the work is so important. Ashe. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm sure Comrade John will come back in when he can. Comrade, just so we're clear, if you were speaking, I could not hear you. So, if we continue to think about who are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Oh,
Okay,
okay.
I think I got it fixed. Thank
Awesome.
you.
No
Can you hear me
problem.
now? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. There was just all kind of problems with internet here, and they certainly charge enough money, and we pay it on time. But this is capitalism, y'all. Like the product is not a quality product. It's just all about profitability. So this is the frustration that you deal with for those out there who think capitalism is so wonderful. Like, we suggest therapy for those people. But anyway, the first question we want to ask is, who are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere? Who are they? Because everybody's indigenous, right? Everybody's from somewhere originally. So we ask this question when we use the term indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, who exactly are we talking about? And we would argue that the definition applies to people who are descendants of the Plains indigenous people, the Plains territories of the Americas, people like the Lakota people, the Oglala Nation, the Mayans, the Incas, the Aztecs, all of these folks all throughout the Americas. These are the indigenous people, along with their descendants, the people who identify as Mexican, as Puerto Rican. These are their descendants. The First Nations people, obviously, who live in we call it Canada, you call it Canada. And those folks who were removed by the mounted police in Canada to make way for the railways in Canada. For those of you who just can't understand why we say there's no such thing as good police. Their entire purpose has been to exploit and oppress colonized people. So all of these folks are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. All those folks I just named. Who is not indigenous to the Western Hemisphere are all of these ridiculous sounding Africans who have never read a single sentence about African history and have accepted the lies of the colonizer about Africa. And because they've accepted those lies, they don't want anything to do with Africa because they see Africa as a place where people are starving, there's no prosperity, and who wants to be associated with that? So we make up an identity. People make up identities all the time. And for you Africans who are claiming you're everything except African, that's what you're doing. You're making up an identity. I talked to this African. He said he was born and raised in New York City and lived there his whole life, but he was native to the Americas. He said he was indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. And I looked at his picture on his page, and this African was dark skinned. So I'm like, so how did you get so dark skinned being indigenous? Because the reason why we're dark skinned is because of where we're indigenous to. We're sun people. Africa's a sun continent. And you're in New York I'm sorry, not New York. He was from Portland, Oregon. I'm sorry. I talked to someone else from New York. And he was from Portland, Oregon. He said he's born and raised there and indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. And I know I lived in Portland. So I know that Portland only gets like 2.5 months of sun per year. So there's no way your family's gonna develop that kind of darkness. He said they had always been in that region. They've never been anywhere else except in the Pacific Northwest. And I told him, I said, we were talking. I said, so do you have, you work, right? Yes. I said, do they provide counseling services? Well, why are you asking me? I said, because you need it badly. You need it badly. You cannot determine the difference between reality and fiction. You need it. And I'm really concerned. I said, do you have any children? I don't have any children. I'm like, thank goodness, please don't procreate. Because this is the type of confusion that has us in the situation that we're in right now. So we just want to state it clearly that the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere are the people that are indicated on this slide. From the Lakota people to the people doing Mexican ballet folklorico, these are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, right? And they are engaged in a struggle to regain their lands, whether they define it as struggling to regain the Pahasapa, or what's known by them, the Lakota people, as the Black Hills in South Dakota, what the colonizer calls Mount Rushmore, with all those crackers up there on the mountain, whether that's the struggle that they're engaged in, or any of these other lands, or whether they call themselves Chicano or Mexicano, and they relate to Aztlan, which is the Southwest states that were stolen from those indigenous people: California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado. That's Aztlan, as they call it, the Southwest. That's what it means. Whether they define the struggle as winning those lands back, it's their land, and they have the right to get this land back. And like I said in the beginning, African people, we only have a just right to one land, and that's Africa. And the only reason why we don't want to accept that is because we don't know a damn thing about Africa. But any African who knows anything about Africa, as Kwame Ture taught us, is proud to be connected to Africa. So we can correct that problem in a very short period of time, but we have to first start by making it clear that the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, they're not fighting for roles in Hollywood. They're not fighting for businesses at the side of the highway selling moccasins. They're not fighting for food booths on the street corners. They're not fighting for any of those things. They're fighting for their dignity, and their dignity is the reclamation of the lands that were stolen from them. And nobody understands that better than conscious African people, because we're fighting for the exact same thing. So when we look at that deeper, we can give examples of what we're talking about. Like there in the picture is a picture of the Pahasapa, or what's known as the Black Hills, or again, what the cracker colonizers call Mount Rushmore, right? That's indigenous land. That's land that's sacred to them. It's sacred land. It's spiritual land that the colonizer just stole, blasted the rocks out, and they have all these cracker motorcycle clubs that go there to Rapid City right under that mountain there, and have all these ridiculous motorcycle events every year, and make fun of the indigenous people. And this is what America, when these people talk about make America great, that's what they want to remain in place, that kind of stuff. That's what they want to continue to happen, and this is why this country is a joke. It's always been a damn joke. It will always be a joke. You have a dumbass football player for the San Francisco 49ers comes in, make America great hat. This is the dumb jock who can't even spell Pahasapa, who can't even tell. If you asked him, well, what about the colonization from the Lakota people, he may as well be speaking Mandarin Chinese because he's so dumb. And this is something that somebody like that is a celebrity in this kind of society. That's why I say all the time, if aliens landed here 100 years from now, and there was a capsule that had information about what was happening at this time in this society, and the aliens opened the capsule and read all the materials about what was happening in 2024, I guarantee you they would get back in their spaceship and they would take the hell off and get the hell away from here as fast as they could. And I'm sure that there are other living beings in this galaxy, and I'm sure they've come here and they've spent 20 minutes observing how ridiculously stupid this world is today and the people that are running it are, and they told themselves, let's get the hell, we got fuel, let's get the hell out of here. We don't want anything to do with these types of people because they are just too primitive and not willing to advance to a higher level of civilization. So that's why we have to talk like this, because this is what we need to do. We want to be able to shock the hell out of people and wake them up and stop people from just going through this society with their head in the damn sand and just looking at what you can buy and just focused on the weekend and getting high and having sex and doing nothing to make any type of contribution. You know, you making a contribution is considered strange. Like, why would you want to do that? You know, this is the most backward society in human civilization. All of these capitalist societies, they're the most backward societies. Even KRS-One, you know, of course, the internet, you have low internet. Whenever we start talking, that's what that comes up. You know, you figure it out, you decide what that means. But KRS-One, the rapper, said it well years ago when he said civilization and technology have nothing to do with one another. And that's absolutely true. You know, the way capitalism trains us, civilization and technology are the same thing, but they're not. And we'll give you an example right here of the integrity and dignity of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere who are fighting against this nonsense I'm talking about. So the Fort Laramie Treaty was a treaty that was made in 1868. And what that treaty was about is the US government established that they would create this treaty with the Lakota people. You know, you have Dakotas, right? That's because that's where the Lakota people are. There's North and South Dakota. So the purpose of this so-called treaty was supposedly to author in peace between the Lakotas regarding this question of the Black Hills, which again, the colonizer calls Mount Rushmore. But just 6 years after that, in 1874, George Custer, the general for the US mercenary military, came in with a military contingent to try and run the Lakotas off the Black Hills because they had discovered gold there in the Pahasapa area. And if you know the history, you know that Red Cloud, who was at that time the chief for the Lakotas, wanted to try to figure out a way. Red Cloud didn't really feel confident that the Lakotas could sustain a military victory against the US government. So Red Cloud wanted to try, and he had trust in the colonizer. He felt that there could be some way that they could adhere to their word, and he wanted to try to see if they could work some of that out. Whereas Crazy Horse took a contingent of warriors from the Dakota. They didn't believe anything the crackers were saying, and they were obviously 100% correct. And they went out and they had successful battles against Custer's regiment. But of course, eventually, once the US government wiped out the buffalo, and you know, this is where they got kettling people from. If you've been engaged in protest marches, you see the police kettle people. That's what they did to Crazy Horse and the warriors from the Lakotas, and they were able to starve them out. And that's how that was able to happen. But they had discovered gold there. That's what it was all about. And so, you know, since that time, I mean, obviously that's 150 years ago. And since that time, the indigenous communities have consistently fought to have their land rights to their sacred Pahasapa Black Hills, colonizer named Mount Rushmore, recognized. They've consistently fought in court, out of court, to have that happen. And what the US government has been forced to do over the last 30 years or so is come up with these offers for them, these financial offers. They've offered them settlements. Like, in other words, we're not going to give you the land back, but we'll give you some money. And the indigenous people, the Lakota people, have consistently rejected those offers. Now, that's very important for multiple reasons. Number one, because that's what keeps the dignity in the struggle, because it is impossible, and that's something that everybody who respects dignity should respect, because it is impossible to say that you're fighting a struggle for justice, but at the same time, you'll accept a financial payout. Because once you do that, it takes the values and the principles out of the struggle you're waging, it evaporates them. Because all you really are is someone who will sacrifice the principles of your struggle for the correct payout. And so up to this point, the indigenous people there in that region have refused to do that. And I'm saying this for you Africans out here who are thinking that there's absolutely nothing wrong with negotiating with terrorists, the US government, for some kind of reparations for slavery. You're basically saying our struggle comes with a payout that we will accept if it's an acceptable payout. And since these Negroes are so bottom rung, an acceptable payout to them is a couple of $1,000s, and they'll take that. And the reason why we don't have that kind of collective dignity is because we don't know who the hell we are. We think we're Americans. And so these coons are looking at it like, okay, I want to negotiate with my government for justice. There's no justice in that. We are not Americans. We are Africans who were kidnapped from Africa. And we've been in America 500 years fighting to survive America. We are Africans fight. You want to know what's your identity? Stop saying African American. Say I'm an African fighting to survive America. I'm fighting to survive capitalism. That's your correct identity. So that's who we are. So if you understand that, like we do, we could never negotiate with terrorists. We have too much respect for the dignity of our struggle to do that. I don't give a damn how much money they offer. We have, and I would say that publicly, because I'm not one of these Negroes like the ones out here that'll say that and then 5 years later I'll accept a check. To hell with their goddamn check. I don't want their money. I don't want anything from them. I just want to organize our people so we can walk over their damn chest. That's what we want to do. So this is an important point to recognize about the indigenous people. Up to this point, they have refused to accept this offer of money. They want their lands back. They want their sacred lands back. The Pahasapa, the Black Hills, they want it back. And I know there are at least a significant number of them who will never compromise on that. And that, you all, is a wonderful lesson in principles and the difference between principles and strategies and tactics. Principles are values that you never compromise, because those values are based on what you see is the correct way to live life. How can you compromise on something if you think it's the correct way to live life? There's no way you can say, well, I believe in that this is the correct way to live life, that I have to respect human beings, and then go out and be disrespectful to who you're dating, go to a restaurant, be disrespectful to the restaurant staff. Then it's not a principle for you. You're just somebody bumping your gums, running your mouth. A principle you never compromise, no matter what. A strategy or a tactic is just a way to get something done. You change that based on its effectiveness. A principle you never compromise. I have a number of principles. One of them is that I will never see a man physically beating a woman and not do something to try to stop it. I just won't do that. I just won't do that. I don't give a damn. They might pull out a gun and shoot me, and that's been something I faced before, but it's a question of what kind of person you want to be on this planet Earth. Some of us have decided, as James Brown said, and I don't know why he said it because he didn't believe it, but he said it in the song, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." I'd rather die on my, can't think of how he said it. Y'all know the lyrics. I'd rather die on than live on my knees. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. That's it. So some of us have accepted that and are willing to pay the ultimate price to maintain that. because I can't even walk around. Like if I saw a man beating on a woman physically and I just didn't do anything about it, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I would worry about that for decades. I would lose respect for myself. That's just me. There are many people out there that wouldn't bother them one bit. Well, that's their problem. It got nothing to do with me. They wouldn't bother them one bit. And then someone jumps on their ass and they want somebody to come and help them. It happens all the time. I've seen it. I've participated in it. I'm not just, this is not just something I'm talking about. I'm saying that that's an example of how principles should work in your life. You refuse to do something that goes against your principles. You refuse to do that. I never let anybody disrespect my child. She's on here. She can interrupt me if I'm lying to you all. And I have put myself in a position on multiple occasions where I was ready to beat somebody's ass who was adult disrespecting my child when she was growing up. She can correct me if I'm lying to you all. And even today, even though she's a grown woman, I would do the same thing. Nobody is going to disrespect my African woman child. Nobody is going to disrespect any African woman anywhere if I'm seeing it happen. I am ready to go to my grave before I let that happen. Proudly, proudly. And that's just how I want to live life, because I can't see living life any other kind of way. This is what we mean when we say living by principles, you all. I know that's hard for a lot of us because we don't know what that means, because we've never lived by principles. We've always only lived by what comes easiest for us. What's the easiest way for us to be able to make a way for ourselves to progress in life individually? So we don't understand that. And that's why nobody, and then you wonder, you come back, you live like that. Well, I can't, I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to put myself out there like that. And then you wonder why nobody respects you. You wonder, well, I don't understand why people don't respect me. They shouldn't respect. You're not worth it. There's roaches walking around here that deserve more respect than you. I mean, I heard a joke yesterday. It was said the man was going to kill the roach, and when he was getting ready to kill the roach said, "The only reason why you're doing that is because I make your wife scream louder than you do." And I'm like, that, there's a lot of people as it relates to the roach that logic applies to. The roach deserves more respect than you do. You've never taken a stand on anything in your life that didn't personally benefit you. And then you wonder why people don't respect you. They shouldn't. They shouldn't respect you. So the takeaways, and if you all, if you haven't been to California, if you ever come to California, or even if you haven't done this, you should go, as Shakur mentioned, the American Indian movement. Every year they do it twice, on Indigenous Peoples Day, which is usually the second Monday of the month of October, and then on Thanksgiving Day, Thanksgiving Day, they organize ceremonies on Alcatraz Island. Because if you know the history, Alcatraz Island was, as Shakur mentioned, it was taken back by Indigenous people, led by many people, including Richard Oakes, who was on one of the earlier slides. And the reason why they did that is because one of the many treaties, they broke them all, but one of the many treaties that were created was that the Indigenous people would get all of the closed military bases and prisons. And Alcatraz, as you know, was a prison. It was a prison that housed people like Al Capone and Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, and people like that were in prison there at Alcatraz in the San Francisco Bay, Oakland Bay. And so there today, that picture on the screen says Indians welcome. That's from when they took the island back in 1969 and 1971. And AIM, the American Indian Movement, does a ceremony every year. So if you ever hear, you should plan to come. You should participate. You got to get up really early, like at 2:30 or 3 in the morning, but it's worthwhile because it gives you their perspective of this colonization experience they've experienced for the last 530 years. So some of the takeaways we should take from that is that, the Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, just like the African masses, just like the Asian masses, all colonized people, we're struggling over our identity. That's the whole point. We were colonized, which by definition means we were denied our identity. And we were forced to think and behave as the Europeans wanted us to, which is basically for us to be pseudo-Europeans. That's what the colonization process was all about. So as a result of that, the indigenous people are struggling for their identity. The people who call themselves Indians or indigenous people, there's a struggle between them and the people that call themselves Chicanos or Mexicanos. They're all the same people. They're all the exact same people. But they have to, that's a struggle that they have to wage with themselves. It's not our place to wage that struggle for them. And they will wage it. They will wage it. Just in my lifetime in the struggle, I've seen tremendous advances in that area. It used to be like it was all about tribal recognition by the fascist US government. And it's still about that for some people. But there are a lot of indigenous people who are saying, why the hell are we pursuing that? We should unite with each other on a mass level. There are millions of us, and we can organize our people and get our lands back. And that is, in our humble view, the correct position. But they have a right to engage in that struggle. We're engaged in the same struggle. There are Africans here that define our identity based on the colonizers' geographical areas. Well, I'm African American. I'm not connected to Africans in the Caribbean, Central America, South America, Europe, certainly not the ones in Africa. I don't have, we're confused about our identity too. And these identity confusions only serve to benefit our enemies. They only serve to benefit our enemies. Asians are confused. Like they're Asians, the Spanish colonized the Philippines. That's why Filipino people have Spanish names. And they're confused about that. There are a lot of, I have a good friend who's born and raised in the Philippines. And her father is Chinese from China, and her mother's Filipino and a Filipina. And the Chinese colonized the Philippines. They went into the Philippines to colonize them. So they have that identity struggle because there's class analysis in these things, right? If you think of China, if you think of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, like those are prestigious Asian countries. If you think of the Philippines, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, North Korea, those are not prestigious Asian countries, right? You don't even look at those countries the same way. You didn't even think about it until I just said it. But that's how capitalism, class struggle works in capitalism. So they got identity struggles too. All colonized people do, but they have the right to work that out, and they will. And what the capitalist system is going to continue to do is fan the flames of that confusion, because they know that when indigenous people unite on a mass level, their days are numbered. Just like they know when African people unite on a mass level, their days are numbered. So our job is to support the unity of the indigenous people, just like we support the unity of the African masses. It doesn't benefit us as African people in any way. You cannot demonstrate how it benefits us to see ourselves as separate people, where just based on where we live, which is totally defined by our enemies. We didn't even create that ourselves. We didn't decide to live. Those of you Africans in the US, you didn't decide to come here. Your ancestors were kidnapped and you were brought here. Even if you're African from somewhere else outside of the US who came here, you still didn't decide that. The system of colonialism decided that, because you couldn't get an education wherever you were. You couldn't get a job. You couldn't get those things. So this process of exploitation is still the reason why you're here. So you didn't decide that either. So it's absurd for us to use the enemy's systems and logic to define ourselves. Only a fool does that. Assata Shakur was correct. Only a confused person uses the enemy's logic to define themselves. Absolutely correct. And so for indigenous people, these questions of tribal recognition, who has it, who doesn't, where the defendants fit into that, and then for us, it's where you were born, race constructs, Kamala Harris is not Black. This person is not Black, identity politics, all of this confusion. It's not about whether Kamala Harris is Black or not. It's whether does Kamala Harris represent the interests of the African masses. God damn it, that's the question. That's the question you got to ask. It's nothing else but that. But in both instances, our power is without dispute tied to our ability to unite within our communities and then with each other. as it only benefits our enemies for us to be divided by colonial boundaries and histories. No question about that. So we continue to stand with our indigenous people. And for Africans who don't understand that, you should relook at this entire last hour because you missed everything if you don't understand that. I mean, I don't know, maybe plug your ears up so you can plug up the holes. All the information is seeping out. I don't know what the problem is, but we'll work with you to correct it because it's got to be corrected. We got to get better, because once we can do that, victory is on the horizon for us. And so we want to invite you. We want to thank you for joining us, of course, and we want to invite you to join us next week on the 10th. You know, in this backwards cesspool country, November 11th is what they call Veterans Day, where they want you to pay respect and honor to people who served in the U.S. military. I mean, this is absolute insanity. You know, people that, and I know, like all of us, especially African people, we got all kind of relatives and loved ones who served in the U.S. military. You can still love them and say that they were wrong. I mean, I know they did it because they needed a job, but, you know, what lengths are we willing to go to have a damn job? I mean, that's part of the problem. So we shouldn't be honoring paid mercenaries who wreak havoc all across the world, because that's what people in the U.S. military do. I don't care if it's your mama, your daddy, your husband, your wife, your daughter. I don't give a damn who it is. There's no question that that's what they do. My father was in the U.S. military. That's what he did. And he was smart enough to figure it out and tell me that. That's why I understood it. That's the first place I came to understand it. But he had dignity. A lot of us don't. You know, you come this Monday posting these goddamn pictures of you in the slave master's uniform. Yeah, I went and killed for the master. I did everything for the master. That's what I did. I'm celebrating myself to bullshit. We want to spend next Sunday talking about the true veterans for truth and justice. People who were in the organizations that struggle for anybody. A dead fish can go with the stream. That's what people in the U.S. military are. The dead fish that go with the stream. We're not impressed with that. We're impressed with people who stand up against the stream despite what happens to them. I got a sweatshirt my wife gave me. It's a hoodie, and it has pictures of people like Medgar Evers, Kwame Ture, Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. I proudly wear that. These are people who stood up against the grain and paid the price for it. All of them paid a tremendous price for it. These are the people that are that's our veterans right there. That's who I respect, and that's who you should respect. So join us next week so we can talk about that. Go to the QR code at the upper left hand, the red one. As Shakur mentioned, all of the other APRP programs are on there, like Forward Ever, Pontula, and the other online programs we have in the APRP. The Forward Ever shop, where you can buy clothing that reflects revolutionary Pan-African messaging. And you can go to Hood Communist Fair and join the APRP. Go to aprp-intl.org and watch the video. You can donate to us at Venmo at A-APRP or PayPal at AAPRP. Please do that. Go support Burkina Books at the lower right-hand QR code, which is a program that we are working with in Burkina Faso on the ground, and buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Unfortunately, only available through Amazon. These people are getting ready to act a fool. Whatever happens in this country after this election, we are needing to defend peoples who are marginalized. This work I fund through sale of the book. I anticipate having to travel some places, so the more books that are bought, the better able we can do that. We can organize resistance to these fascists. So be strong, keep your head on a swivel, you all. Capitalism is going down the drain, and these people will kill you to try to prevent that from happening. Don't let it do it. Kill them first before they kill you. Yeah, I said that. I'll say it again. Kill them first before they kill you. That's an absolute thing. Don't be sitting there waiting, covering your head because they're pointing a gun at you. Be prepared to take them out. Be strong. We are winning this struggle. That's why it's so much insanity happening. Forward ever, backwards never.